Hey guys, welcome back to Alienation. It has been the longest time. If you're a regular listener or viewer, I am so sorry. I did not plan to be away for so long, but obviously life gets in the way. I am just far too busy at the moment. If you're watching, I also just want to address the elephant in the room, which is how I look right now. I'm sick as a dog, so if I sound gross, if I look gross, I look really weird because I wanted to do a Halloween look, a makeup look, but because I am so sick and the fact that I have to blow my nose every 32 seconds, there was just no point doing a full-on face painted look, so this is what happened. No idea what I'm supposed to be. I kind of give off zombie vibes mixed with, I don't know, vampire, dead, I don't really know. I look how I feel, basically. So we're gonna go with that. I also got new hair. I had my hair cut for the first time, like, ever. So I look very different, very weird right now. But anyway, welcome back. It's so good to be sat down filming, even though I feel like shit. It is so good to be doing this again. Before I do get into it, when I started Alienation, there were certain cases that I 100% knew I really wanted to cover. So like the Emily Jones case that I did, which was one of my first episodes, this case today, and there is also a Christmas case, which I 100% knew that I definitely wanted to cover. Yes, they are both highly covered and very popular cases, so I'm so sorry if you have heard every YouTuber out there or every podcaster talk about these cases. If you want to guess down below, like I said, the Christmas one is a very popular case. If you want to guess which case it's going to be, if you're on YouTube, leave me a comment down below and I'd like to know if you guys can guess which one it is. But today, if you haven't guessed by the title of this episode, I'm going to be talking about the Candyman. And because it's Halloween today, so happy Halloween, guys. I completely forgot to say that, but happy Halloween. Favorite day of the year. But because it is a Halloween case, I just had to make a reappearance today and cover this case. I just realised because I just blabbled so much, I didn't do my usual intro. Welcome back to Alienation. My name is Megan and I sit down... It's not every Sunday, let's not lie. I sit down on Sundays and I talk about any form of weird and not so wonderful topic that really interests me. And today we're going to talk about the Candyman. There we go. I feel a bit better now. So this case actually takes place in America. So we're going to be heading back to the year 1974 in Deer Park, Texas. And this is where the O'Brien family lived. See, the family consisted of the dad, Ronald Clark O'Brien, his wife, Deneen. I'm going to say Deneen, but it's like spelled Deneen. And they had two children, Timothy, who was 8, and Elizabeth, who was only 5 at the time that this all happened. There wasn't much information about Deneen in the slightest. She wasn't massively involved when it came to the information about this case, which, good for her, I guess. But Ronald was a very good member of society. He was involved with the church. He organised a lot of community stuff. He was an optician. Overall, he was just a decent guy. And as far as everyone was aware, this family lived a pretty happy, ordinary life. So like I said, it is 1974, and guess what day it is? It's Halloween. It's the 31st of October, the best day of the year, and it actually happened to be a Thursday. Not that anyone really cares about that detail of this case, but there you go. It was a Thursday, guys. But anyway, obviously, with it being Halloween, the kids really wanted to go trick-or-treating. The family didn't exactly live in a bad neighbourhood whatsoever, but Ronald and his neighbour Jim actually came up with a pretty good plan when it came to Halloween night. They decided that they were going to head over to a sort of neighbouring town or a neighbouring neighborhood, which was a little bit more on the bougie side. It wasn't a expensive area, but it was a slightly nicer, more well-off area compared to where they lived. And they thought that this would be a good idea because with these families having a little bit more money, they were probably more than likely to hand out better candy. So to hand out the more expensive stuff, the nicer treats and whatever. Yeah, so that was the plan. It's a good plan. Rinse the rich. Get your kids the good shit. Good idea. But Ronald and Jim and the kids headed off into that neighbourhood to go trick-or-treating that night. So the weather actually wasn't that good that night. It was a little bit drizzly, nothing too bad. So as they were going about their business, they came across this one specific house. There was no decorations outside as far as I'm aware. All the lights were off in the house. There was just no sign of life, which usually is a sign that either no one's home or they're hiding. They don't want to give your kids treats. They're like, fuck giving away the sweets that I've bought to your kids. I'm not feeding your kids. These are my sweets. But anyway, the kids were obviously still really excited. They didn't care. They had to knock on every single door, get as many treats as possible. So regardless of the house being dark, they ran straight up to the door, knocked on. But as expected, no one answered the door. And kids being kids, they didn't want to wait around. They didn't want to waste any more time. So they just ran off. They were like, okay, no one's home, screw this, let's go. And they headed off. Jim followed, but weirdly enough, Ronald chose not to. He was like, hold on. I'll be with you guys in a second. I'm going to get us some treats from this house. And eventually Ronald does catch up to the group. And to everyone's surprise, he has a handful of candy. But not just any normal candy. He has 5 huge ass pixie sticks. Now these were apparently like decent candy back in the days. These were what everyone wanted. They were 21-inch pixie sticks. See, we didn't have pixie sticks in the UK. We had, what were they called? Is it rainbow dust? And it's basically just a huge tube full of sherbet, just pure sugar. They were great. I was never allowed them though. But anyway, he had these huge ass pixie sticks in his hands and he basically just said, oh, you didn't wait long enough. Eventually someone came to the door and answered. Obviously the kids were absolutely buzzing because that's what they went for. They went to this neighborhood to get the good shit and they'd just been handed 21-inch tubes of sugar. So Ronald gave each of the kids one. I'm not sure specifically which kids were there. I know his kids Timothy and Elizabeth were there, and it is unclear as to whether Jim had both his kids with him or just one kid, but either way, each of the kids that were there got one of these pixie sticks and there was one left over, so I presume there was 4 kids there. But regardless, they all ended up with one of these really cool big pixie sticks. So they carried on trick-or-treating, having a great time, and while they were trick-or-treating or while they were on the way home, I'm not too sure either way, the group actually bumped into a family and Ronald recognised one of the boys from church because, like I said, he was very involved in the church, so he decided to give the last one left to him. So like I mentioned, it was raining pretty bad. It was getting a little bit too heavy, so the family decided they'd had enough candy, let's just go home, call it a night. And I believe that when they did get back, Deneen actually chose to go out and meet a friend that night, I think. So it's up to Ronald to make sure the kids get ready for bed, and that night, as the children are actually getting into bed and getting ready for bed, Timothy asks his dad if he can have some candy. And Timothy was told by Ron that you can have one piece of candy, just one, which is fair enough. It's probably late at this point. It's a Thursday, it's a school night. You don't want to be giving your kids a shit ton of sweets, sugar and candy before bed, so he said you can have one piece. So some sources say that Timothy chose this specific piece of candy himself, but then others say that Ron actually chose it and gave it to him. But regardless, the choice of sweet or candy was the massive pure sugar sherbet pixie stick. Great idea. Let's get your kids all hyped up right before bed on a school night. Really good idea. Love that. So it turns out Timothy couldn't actually get the sherbet out of the pixie stick, so I don't know if he couldn't open it or if he couldn't actually get it out, but regardless, Ron actually gave him a hand, sort of poured it down his throat. There you go, son, knock yourself out. But they were staple closed, so they were quite difficult to get into anyway. And after Timothy had finished this pixie stick, he did complain that it had a really sour taste and it just didn't taste right. And it had left him with this really bitter taste in his mouth. So Ron, being a very smart guy, really intelligent, after this kid had already downed a shit ton of sugar, he decided to give him even more sugar. So he grabbed a Kool-Aid, gave it to Timothy and was like, here, wash the taste down with more sugar. Shortly after this, Timothy started to clutch at his stomach and say that he had a really bad tummy ache and that he just wasn't feeling too great. Then he started to keel over, he was in that much pain, and he even ran to the bathroom because he felt like he was going to be sick. And then he started vomiting uncontrollably, and then he collapsed to the floor where he sadly started convulsing around on the floor, and not long after that, he basically just collapsed. So Ronald, his dad, was with him at this point, so he obviously picked him up, he was trying to comfort him, but then he just went completely limp in his arms, and there was pretty much no life in Timothy whatsoever. So I'm not sure who called the ambulance, but regardless, an ambulance was called. When the ambulance arrived, they got him in there and they headed off and rushed down to the hospital. But sadly, before the ambulance could even make it to the hospital, so this was within an hour of him having that piece of candy, Timothy passed away. So in most towns, regardless if it's a small town or what, news spreads like wildfire, specifically if a child dies on Halloween. And obviously the rumours started to spread that he died from potential poisoned candy. No one really knew what had happened, but all they know is that he'd had a pixie stick and shortly after he passed away. So obviously everyone in the town knew about it, and like you would, everyone began to panic. All the parents who'd just taken their kids trick-or-treating, collected candy, were terrified that their child also had poisoned candy. So it was kind of just pure panic amongst the neighbourhoods. I don't know why I laughed then. It's not funny in the slightest. But yeah, I can just sort of picture everyone going insane, throwing candy everywhere. But parents were just terrified that their kid could have potentially eaten something, or they've got a huge bag of poison candy. So a lot of the parents started to collect all of the kids' trick-or-treat treats, and they took them down to the police station because you wouldn't want to risk it, would you? The kids were obviously all fuming, but the parents were like, no, sorry kids, but just no, it's not worth it. So like I said, it was all taken to the police station so the police could start checking through the candy to see if there was any signs of, I don't know, unusual activity on the wrappers. See, the wrappers had been opened, tampered with. They were doing this in hopes of maybe stopping it happening to any other kids in the neighbourhood. And luckily because of this, no other child was actually poisoned. So that was a good move on their behalf, no matter how pissed the kids were. It was a good move. No one else died. So we're going to go back to poor Timothy. There was a guy called Mike Hinton, and he was a Harris County prosecutor, I believe. And he had obviously heard about what had happened, and he was like, do you know what? I'm getting involved in this. I'm going to figure out what the fuck is going on. Something has to be done about this. You can't have kids dying on Halloween. No way. So he actually called Dr. Joseph A. I cannot say this to save my life. Jachimchik? I think that's how you say it. Dr. Joseph. We'll go with Dr. Joseph. But anyway, he was a chief medical examiner and he was involved in this case. And Mike basically asked Joseph, do me a favour, can you tell me what Timothy's breath smells like? Which you might think, why is he smelling a dead kid's breath? That's very weird. But if you didn't actually know, when a victim has been poisoned a specific way, sometimes an odour is given off and you can smell it on their breath. And guess what? Poor Timothy, his mouth smelled just like almonds. This is actually known to be an indicator of cyanide poisoning. It was confirmed though, Timothy had been poisoned and the suspected poison was cyanide. So they needed to figure out what the hell was going on. How on earth has Timothy got a hold of potassium cyanide? How has he managed to digest it? What is going on? So like I said, when they were looking into it, they found out that the last thing he ate was a pixie stick, which is why they'd started collecting all the candy and stuff. They were looking for more pixie sticks in case more had been tampered with. But naturally, they did need to talk to Ron because obviously Ron's his father. Ron was there when he pretty much died, and they needed to get to the bottom of what had happened to his poor son. So just standard procedure, they asked Ron to sort of take the police through what happened that night, just so they could retrace poor Timothy's steps, figure out what actually happened, how he got hold of the pixie sticks, all of that jazz. When they were questioning him, they also said, can you actually take us to the house where you got these pixie sticks from? So Ronald mentioned that they'd got these pixie sticks from this specific house, so the police obviously were like, great, you need to take us to this house, we need to find out where they've come from, who's giving you these, or if they got them from somewhere else, etc. So just bearing in mind, because of the weather, they hadn't actually hit up that many houses that night to go trick-or-treating, so you probably could remember briefly where you went. Seems how it only happened a few hours ago. So Ron was given quite a simple task by the police. They were like, okay, perfect, take us to this house, point it out. That's all we need from you. But weirdly enough, no matter how hard Ronald tried to rack his brain, he could not remember where this house was. He had no idea. They were walking around the neighborhood aimlessly. He was like, oh, I don't know. I don't recognize anything. I have no idea what's going on. I don't know where I got these weird, mysterious pixie sticks from this really dark, mysterious house that killed my son. No idea. Absolutely useless. Couldn't remember. I get he's just gone through a traumatic experience of his son dying. But it only happened a few hours ago. You'd remember what you'd remember. But Ronald was able to give a little bit of somewhat useful, I say in air quotations, information about that night. He told them that he never saw the person's face, that when someone eventually came to the door, they sort of cracked it the teeniest amount, you know, like when you don't want to be seen, but you need to open the door, kind of like that. And then this just arm appeared. And he noted that it was definitely a man. He was adamant it was a man, 100%, it was a man. And he knew this because the man's arm was very, very hairy. I mean, a woman could have really hairy arms. But either way, he was adamant it was a man. That's all I know. It was dark. I never saw the face, and he had a really hairy arm. That's great, Ron. Thanks for all your help. A few days go by and the police are starting to get really, really frustrated. They just don't seem to be getting anywhere with this case. And they were starting to get really pissed off as well, specifically at Ron, because he had answers to this case. Like, he had to know more information about this. He had to know where this house was. So during this time, Timothy's autopsy results actually came back and they figured out something that is kind of still mind-blowing. Timothy had consumed enough cyanide to kill 2 adults, let alone a young child. And at this point, they had some of the other pixie sticks. So when they were testing them and looking into it, it turns out that the top 2 inches of the pixie sticks were laced with just pure potassium cyanide. And it turns out some of the other pixie sticks actually had enough cyanide in them to kill 3 to 4 adults. So much cyanide. But the police did actually find out that whoever had done this hadn't sort of covered their tracks that well. They hadn't really done the best job with trying to hide the fact that these pixie sticks were tampered with. The tops were all torn open and then they were like folded over and stapled back together. So unless you were literally staring at every single piece of candy, you probably wouldn't necessarily notice it. But if you did pay enough attention, you'd be like, what the fuck has happened to that? But regardless, this whole like stapling situation was actually a bit of a blessing in disguise because they'd been stapled back closed. This is actually what ended up saving a potential other victim's life that night. So I'm not sure which child this was. In all honesty, I don't know if it was one of, what's his name? Oh my God, what's his name? Guy went out with Ronald. What's he called? Jim. Is it Jim? I think it's Jim. Jim or Tim? No, it's got to be Jim. Anyway, I don't know if it was Jim's kids or if it was the 10-year-old boy that had been given the pixie stick by Ronald, but regardless, one of the children was actually found fast asleep in his bed, clutching the pixie stick. The kid didn't actually eat it because the kid had given up because he couldn't actually open the pixie stick. He was going to have it that night in bed, couldn't open it, so he just fell asleep holding it, which, imagine being that kid's parents and being like, hallelujah, because you could have died. You could have died and you fell asleep clutching poison. At this point, when the police had this information that there was a shit ton of cyanide that had been sort of distributed that night, the police were just eventually like, come on, Ronald, you've got to help us out, man. There's someone out there guilty of murdering your son and also guilty of attempted murder of 4 other victims. Like, oh, come on, this is kids we're talking about. You've got to help us out. And they actually took more of a stern approach with him this time, and they decided to take him out again. And I don't know if this sort of scared Ronald into thinking, oh God, I've remembered now. But yeah, regardless, it actually worked this time because when they were out again, Ronald was able to point out the house. He knew exactly which house it was. He was like, that one over there, 100%. No ifs, no buts, no maybe it's that house, which is weird because they'd already walked him past this house loads of times and he had no idea. But anyway, thank God he remembered this house. He's like, that is it. That is the house. Off you go. Go arrest him. Go. So the police followed this lead and they found out that the person that owned this was called Courtney Melvin. So he kind of fitted the whole suspect profile, which was terribly vague. He was a guy. So there we go. He fit the one profile that we had. Ronald was adamant he was a guy. Do we know if he has hairy arms? I have no idea. So at the time, Courtney was an air traffic controller at like a local airport. I think it was Houston's airport. It's quite a big airport. And when they'd found out this information, he was actually at work. So they headed down to this airport to go question him, arrest him, whatever their plan was. And this must have been so embarrassing, but Courtney was actually arrested in front of all of his colleagues. Turns out, Courtney actually had a solid alibi. He was like, it wasn't me. I was at work. I was at work until 11 p.m. and guess what? I have a ridiculous amount of witnesses that can back up this story. I'm pretty sure I read that it was something like 200 witnesses who saw him at work that day, who were with him on shift. And yeah, there was no question about it. He didn't do this. He wasn't home. So either way, the police pretty much had nothing. Back to square one. So when, as most people are aware, police look into murders, they kind of have to look everywhere. They have to look into the victims' lives, who the victims are surrounded by, so family, friends, people at school, all of that jazz. And obviously this included his dad, Ronald. And I tell you something, when they were digging into Ronald's life, they found some sketchy shit. We've got a bit of a list we're going to reel off. Because Ronald, bless him, had a lot of side issues going on. So firstly, they discovered that Ronald was in an insane amount of debt. And if you don't know, money is a huge motivator when it comes to crime. But when I say debt, and a lot of debt, we're actually talking in US dollars, $100,000 worth of debt. $100,000. That's actually equivalent to over $500,000 today. I want to know what he was spending it on. Like, where's all that money going? Anyway, it turns out Ronald also hadn't been able to hold a job down for the last 10 years. Which kind of explains why he's not got that much money and he's in debt. In the 10 years leading up to Timothy's death, Ronald had actually had over 21 jobs in 10 years. So anyway, the police carried on digging. They were finding quite a lot of information out and it was just sort of getting deeper and deeper, this hole that they were going down, this rabbit hole of Ronald's life. And it turns out that the job he was currently at, he was also about to be fired from because they were suspecting him of theft. Bear in mind, he was an optician, so I don't know what he was stealing, probably money or goods to sell on, I have no idea, but regardless, he worked at Texas State Optical or something, and yeah, they were about to fire him from that one as well, so this number of jobs was just getting higher and higher, and this information was just getting more and more intense. Next, they found out, yes, I am still going, they found out so much shit on this guy. They found out that his car was about to be repossessed. He defaulted on several bank loans, and even his family home had been foreclosed on, which... oh shit, Ronald, you are in trouble, hun. It's just not looking good for him at all. But what the hell did all of this have to do with Timothy? Obviously, we need to figure out, Is there a link here? What's going on? So basically, the icing on the cake was when they found out that Ronald had actually taken out life insurance policies on his children. He had taken out a $10,000 policy per child in January of the same year that Timothy had died. So obviously 1974, and apparently this is equivalent to about $53,000 this day. So they're big ass policies to be taken out on two young, healthy children who don't have any like medical issues. They don't, yeah, you're not expecting them to pass away. Like, they're big ass policies to be taken out. But anyway, it gets worse. Ronald, being the really smart guy that he is, 1 month before Halloween, he decided to take out an additional $20,000 policy on his kids. So that's like, what, I don't know, $40,000 worth of policies on his kids. A bit weird, that Ronald. So at this point, they'd also questioned Deneen, and they were like, these are some big ass policies for your kids, but it turns out she had no idea that he'd taken out any form of life insurance policies on either of his kids. So they continued their investigation, focusing on Ronald like there was no tomorrow. And they found out that when it came to the day of Timothy's funeral, so he's burying his own son, Ron was acting all kinds of weird, and not the sort of expected weird. Obviously, if you lost someone, you usually devastated. I know everyone deals with these things differently. You're usually sad, crying, all of the above, but Ronald was just acting a little bit strange for someone who was burying his son. And this obviously was brought to the police's attention because it's just not normal behaviour. So it turns out Ron had written a song about Timothy and God and Jesus and him joining them in the sky or heaven, whatever. I don't know. He wrote a song about that sort of stuff. And Ronald apparently was very, very, very angry with his relatives because on the day of the funeral, they decided not to stay up late. I mean, funerals are exhausting. You've been crying all day, you're tired. They chose not to stay up late, but Ronald wanted them to watch this really late night recording of this song that was being televised that night, but apparently it was really late. And he was really angry because they decided not to stay up and watch it. They've just buried a family member who's a kid. They want to go to sleep. That's slightly questionable behaviour in the police's eyes, well, in everyone's eyes, really. He's not really sad at the funeral. He's just angry because he wanted his song to be heard by the family. It's so weird. But anyway, even weirder. Remember that insurance policy we were talking about? It turns out that Ronald had phoned up the insurance company at 9 a.m. the day after Timothy had died. So this was only a few hours after Timothy had been pronounced dead. He phoned up the insurance company to ask about the payout because his son had died. He's not even cold yet, and he's trying to collect money off him. I cannot wrap my head around this in the slightest. What a dumb fucking dude. Anyway, moving on. The police issued a warrant because this was just, it was all just adding up. Ron was sort of making his own bed to lie in. He was just looking guiltier and guiltier as the time went on. So they got a warrant to go and search the house, and weirdly enough, they found scissors in the house. They found scissors. Most households have scissors. So anyway, there was a reason as to why these scissors were suspicious. And that is because they found a plastic residue on these scissors that matched perfectly to the pixie stick fabric plastic coating sleeve thing they were in. It was a match. So obviously he was arrested and he was taken into custody because they wanted to question him even more. And after he was taken into custody, more and more evidence was piling up, more people coming forward, letting the police know things, and this case was just getting more and more solid. So at the time, Ronald was apparently attending community college, and one of his professors came forward and said that Ronald would ask him really weird questions like, oh, is cyanide a really good poison? What's more lethal, cyanide or other types of poison? Which, can this guy get any stupider? Another witness came forward, someone who apparently worked for a chemical company in Houston, and he just told the police that not long before Timothy's incident, a man had actually come in somewhat fitting his description. He couldn't remember exactly what the man looked like. All he said is that he remembered him wearing a beige or blue smock, similar to what sort of a dentist or an optician or someone in that field would wear, which is exactly what Ronald would wear because he was an optician. But apparently this man had gone into this chemical place and he was asking to buy cyanide. But after he was told that the smallest amount that he was able to buy was £5 worth of cyanide, he actually left because I presume he just didn't need that much. So again, he's kind of leaving a bit of a trail behind him, isn't he? Oh, and to add to this dumbass behaviour, on the day of Timothy's funeral, this funeral day must have been an absolute disaster, but apparently the day of his son's funeral and a few days after the funeral and after Timothy had died, Ronald was going around boasting about how his fortunes were all about to change. All of his money troubles were going to go away. He'd be coming into a bunch of money, all that jazz. Again, what are you doing? Your son has just died. Why are you talking about getting money from it? So they pretty much had enough against Ronald to take him to trial because it's pretty much, like I said, it's a solid black and white case. And Ronald being Ronald, he entered a non-guilty plea and he actually maintained his innocence all the way throughout the rest of his life, I guess. But when it came to the trial, friends, families, co-workers, even his own wife actually testified against him. Everyone knew he'd done it. He was so guilty of this. And obviously the press get a hold of everything, so they started to refer to him as the Candyman. So on June the 3rd, 1975, after only 46 minutes of deliberating, the jury returned a guilty verdict. So he was actually charged with the 1 count of the capital murder for his son, and he was also charged with 4 counts of attempted murder. And only an hour later, it was decided that Ronald was actually going to get the death penalty, and he was going to be executed by electric chair. So this was the 70s. This is when this was like still a thing. Is it still a thing? Do they still do that? They still electrocute people? I don't think they do. After he'd been arrested and everything, his wife actually filed for divorce because, you know, she's got a brain. And she took little Elizabeth and they never saw him again because why would you want to? So anyway, when people are actually on death row or in prison, they do tend to try and appeal their case and the sentences and all that lot. So it does take a little bit of time to get things going. But it wasn't actually until March 31st of 1984 that he was finally put to death for his crime. So in that time, they were waiting to actually execute him. The US Supreme Court had sort of deemed the electric chair method as really cruel and inhumane and a very unusual punishment. So instead, they ended his life with a lethal injection. So basically, outside the Texas State Penitentiary, which is where he was being held and I presume where he was being executed, so this is in Huntsville, there was a huge crowd of around maybe like 300 people who had all gathered to sort of hear that he'd been killed, hear that it was the end of it. And apparently all the crowds like throwing candy, they were shouting trick or treat, kind of celebrating it, which again, I could do kind of understand. But that is pretty much the story of the Candyman. What a piece of fucking garbage he was. Nasty boy. But that is it. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Whether you're listening or watching on YouTube, thank you. Thank you for joining me. And I'm so sorry again. I know it has been the longest time and I'm so sorry I'm not doing regular uploads at the minute. It is not the end of Alienation. It won't be. I love this too much to not do it. Just sadly at this point in my life, I just don't have time. Anyone who does true crime stories on YouTube or on a podcast or whatever, I applaud them so much because the amount of time and effort that goes into researching cases, filming it all, editing it all, it takes the longest time. So I'm sorry there's not going to be weekly uploads. I'm sorry there hasn't been weekly uploads. I will hopefully in the future be coming back to more regular uploads. But this moment in time, I just don't have the time. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. But I do just want to quickly say, this is my whole like ADHD brain going on because I have to be doing something. I have to have my spooky fix. So I do actually have another podcast coming soon. I know people are probably like, why don't you just put all your time and effort into this? I know, I hear you out, but sadly, like I said, I don't have the time to research a case, to sit down, to do a filming backdrop, to do a full face of makeup. I shouldn't really say this is makeup. I keep seeing myself in the viewfinder and it's not an attractive sight. I love how I'm finally showing off my new hair and I look like shit. But this way I can get my spooky fix. I can sit down in any area of my home looking like a potato and create spooky content. It is basically just me reading scary stories. That is coming soon in the next few weeks, but that is just to sort of keep me going in the time being until I can dedicate my time again to Alienation. So thank you so much for bearing with me. Like I said at the start, if you're listening on YouTube, comment down below which case you think I want to cover in December. I'd love to see if any of you guys can figure it out. But thanks for having me again. I'm going to go now and shut up because my throat is killing me. But before I leave, if you are watching on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. Please give it a massive thumbs up. Leave me a comment down below and subscribe if you are not. And if you are listening on podcast streaming services, please rate, review, share, all of the above. Help spread the word. And hopefully I will catch you guys soon. Also, have an amazing Halloween. Stay safe. Check your candy and all that jazz. Bye.